presently the head of Aspect Frontline. And in 2003, he established the AFP's human trafficking team to address the crimes of sexual exploitation of women and children. Then we'll have Dr. Ian Hesketh, who was a British police officer for 30 years and is presently the well-being lead at the UK College of Policing and the senior responsible owner for the National Police Wellbeing Service in the UK. Chief Dale McPhee is Chief of Police at the Edmonton Police Service in Alberta, Canada. He's retired police chief from Prince Albert in Saskatchewan and the retired Deputy Minister of Corrections and Policing in the Ministry of Justice for the Saskatchewan government. Dr. Konstantinos Papazoglou completed his postdoctoral appointment at Yale University School of Medicine, and he completed his doctoral degree, PhD in psychology as the Vanier Scholar at the University of Toronto. And he's a former police major of the Hellenic Police Force and the European Police College, and he holds a master's degree in applied psychology from New York University. And Chief Paul Peterson is Chief of Police for the Greater Sudbury Police Service in Ontario, Canada. He holds a master's degree in public administration, has worked in policing for over 35 years in a variety of areas from general patrol to criminal investigations. And then Grant, as we mentioned earlier, will speak for Dr. Katrina Sanders, who is the Chief Medical Officer for the Australian Federal Police. And Katrina is a fellow of the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, and she has a master's degree in public health. And then we'll have Tom Stamatakis, who's the president of the Canadian Police Association and the International Council of Police Representative Associations. And if Jeff Thompson is able to join us, we'll have him. Dr. Jeff Thompson is an adjunct associate research scientist at Columbia University Medical Center, a certified psychological autopsy investigator with the American Association for Suicidology, and a law enforcement detective in the New York City Police Department. So that's our distinguished panel, and I'm very pleased to ask Dr. Katie Kemker to lead off our presentation. So Katie, it's over to you.
Thank you so much. And the good news is that Jeff is just uploading again some app stuff and said that he's joining us shortly. Welcome to our International Police Mental Health webinar. What a delight to obviously here being with my friends and colleagues and with all our attendees. We do know that clinical depression, anxiety disorders, trauma and stress-related disorders, in particular post-traumatic stress disorders and substance use disorders, are among the many mental health conditions that are increasingly being identified and addressed as part of workplace mental health prevention as well as interventions. We also know that depression is predicted to be the leading cause of burden and disease in 2030 by the World Health Organization. As obviously we are well aware that police are exposed to a unique set of challenges in their day-to-day activities, and COVID-19 pandemic has certainly presented a very significant additional occupational stressor. By now, we're familiar with operational stress injuries, so which are, as we know, persistent psychological difficulties resulting from operational and service-related duties. But I think one thing that we really want to appreciate within operational stress injuries is really the comorbidity among mental health conditions, but also comorbidity among mental health and physical health conditions, as well as psychosocial stressors. So all of those together are very much part of operational service-related duties. In addition to mental health disorders and mental health conditions that we often hear, there are also other health risk factors, very significant, if not even more so, as they do contribute to the development, exacerbation, and or maintenance of psychological health problems. we have increasingly heard of burnout, which, as we know, is marked by exhaustion, the sense of depersonalization, cynicism taking place, and then also this reduction in work self-efficacy, this negative self-evaluation. And we also know that burnout is a separate construct from depression and anxiety, and it's more organizationally based than operationally based. So this is something we want to keep in mind. Similarly, we know that about the other health risk factor related to moral injury. So anytime we question our decision-making or ability to prevent what happened in line of duty can again set the stage for moral distress and moral suffering. We do know within police, there's always this inherent moral injury that is involved. Not every moral injury event can lead to psychological distress, but certainly some events are more impactful than others. And again, there's always the accumulation of events that we need to appreciate. I'm going to come back to that again. And of course, the compassion fatigue. So this intense tension and preoccupation with the emotional and physical pain of the ones that we are trying to help. So it's not necessarily again about the trauma, but it's again the stress resulting from the traumatized individual. As to why this is important is that we do know through the study, so these are separate constructs, but also there are single significant contributors to post-traumatic disorders in addition to mental health conditions. So it's not always a trauma that is directly linked to mental health conditions and post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm just going to share something again very quickly here. So just going over some examples. A patrol officer and his partner respond to a domestic violence call. The officer's partner is physically injured while attempting to subdue the perpetrator. The unharmed officer follows the operational protocol he learned during training on domestic violence cases and takes reasonable defensible action. Nonetheless, because of the negative outcome, harm to the partner, the officer cannot shake the guilt he feels for not doing enough to prevent what happened to his partner. Because of this moral distress, in the future, he may try to avoid responding to similar calls, and or he may act in a hyper-aggressive manner to prevent a similar outcome. Another example, moral injury that sometimes feeds our anger. Everyone around you is treating you like a hero for having the courage to do what you had to do. Outwardly, you show appreciation for the supportive comments, but inwardly, you feel emotionally broken. So these are again taken here, and along with this study, I had very much the honor to be part of, along with first author being Dr. Konstantinos Papazoglou. He's one of our speaker, one of our session members here today. We did look here among again National Police of Finland, 307 police officers. We wanted to look at to what extent again, and if moral injury does contribute to PTSD after controlling for compassion fatigue, and same goes for compassion fatigue. And indeed, we did find that moral injury is a significant predictor to PTSD and its diagnostic clusters after controlling for compassion fatigue, and same findings for compassion fatigue being a significant single contributor to PTSD. So if we even look at some of the findings, so the two predictors accounted for 44% of the variance of re-experiencing symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, 46.6% of the variance of avoidance cluster symptoms, and 45.3% of the variance of hyperarousal cluster of symptoms. Within the study, we looked at DSM-4 diagnostic manual and not the DSM-5 diagnostic manual. The DSM-5, we have the additional cluster of symptoms, which is the negative alterations in mood and cognitions. So what this means is that in addition to always taking into account and considering the exposure to potentially traumatic incidents, we also need to appreciate the exposure to potentially moral injuries events, including the increased likelihood of moral injury and compassion fatigue. When we talk about police work, there is exposure to the trauma, of course, but then also to occupational stressors. And by that, we are talking about organizational stressors, as we know, and operational stressors. Now, what we know through findings and what is very interesting and for us to keep in mind is that if we look at the range of organizational stressors, the two main ones that have been found to have the strongest mental health impact are I need to prove value to my organization. And the other one is that if I'm ill, people will look down on me. And in terms of operational stressors, the two ones with the strongest mental health impact are fatigue, and the other one, difficulty keeping up balance between work and personal responsibilities. As to why, again, this is important is that when we control for traumatic incidents, occupational stressors are single. So again, both organizational and operational stressors are single significant contributors to mental health conditions, including PTSD. So when we look at everything all together, it's again pointing to the importance here at whole person management approach, a holistic approach to care, and taking into account a system approach when we're talking about workplace mental health. And of course, as we know, starting with a positive, healthy organizational culture, we know that an organization can set great policies, great procedures in place, but if there is lack of support, there is perception of a lack of support, or there is a low morale or low engagement, or not a perception of an unhealthy culture, then any implementation of even a great policy might be difficult to implement. The second element is being able to identify and to reduce workplace risk factors at both organizational and at worker level. And again, modifiable risk factors. So far we talked about some key modifiable risk factors that there is a room for us to target. And of course, to be able to identify and build workplace protective factors at both organizational and worker level. And again, we can always come up with 10,000 protective factors, but ideally we want to come up with protective factors that help us to really buffer against those modifiable risk factors. So protective factors that help us to build prevention and resiliency, and of course, what we call post-traumatic growth. And so again, just a few seconds in terms of when we talk about building resiliency pathways at both organizational and worker level, any budget, we want to make sure that we keep in mind a wellness lens, but that also means we want to have enough capacity, funding, and staffing in place. These are the key elements actually that help us for proper work accommodation when needed, for reducing the workplace stigma, and also to better management of disability management. There is professional worthiness, so to feel that we are being recognized, so professional worthiness, participation, and skill utilization. All those three elements, again, help us these are also being found to be key workplace protective factors that help us to buffer against those modifiable risk factors, along with compassion satisfaction, which is a key protective factor. So it's the contentment from being able to do our work well and helping others. We know, looking at the data, when we compare police with the general population, that police is much lower in terms of the compassion satisfaction. So very much it's important to build that along with other modifiable factors that we know: mindfulness, self-compassion, and psychological flexibility. So I would love to go for another 10 hours, but I would be the one who probably might be breaking the rules here. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie. Well, let's move on to Grant for your presentation, please, Grant.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning and good afternoon to everybody that is present. So I was a police officer for 34 years, but I was also an athlete. And during my policing career, not once did we ever train the mind. We focused on training the body. And essentially, there's a whole area there that has been mostly left undealt with. And as we know, it's the mind that suffers mostly in regards to injuries. So you'll see here the two pictures on the left. We've got some elite athletes, tennis, boxing. For all my American and Canadian friends, Tom Brady here. And we have race car driving. On the other side, we have the police. So essentially, the mental functioning is a necessity in police work officers. Officers must enter a career with exceptional mental health and are expected to remain that way for the duration of their career without little to no training. Some of the similarities in these two traits: focus, peripheral awareness, relaxed mind and body, decision-making under pressure, operating with external noise, emotions, You kind of get the picture. I won't go on about that. The only difference that I could really see between the two is that these folks on the left get paid an awful lot of money. These people on the right don't, but they deal with life and death situations. So when we talk about the sense of working as a tactical athlete, it's this guy in the middle that we think of, but really it's this guy over here that we need to be working on. And that is the brain. And by developing and introducing new athletic preparation into high performance training, elite athletes have been able to tap into their visual, vestibular, and proprioceptive and interoceptive systems to powerfully affect the way they think and move for optimal performance. And the introduction of such a system into police preparedness would not only help provide a tactical edge for operational police in stressful, critical and high risk situations, but also substantially support officer psychological and physical safety and wellness. So an athlete's ability to maintain control of their emotions in the face of pressure and adversity and remain positive is essential to successful performance, exactly as policing is. Performance or competitive anxiety and arousal levels are two emotional control factors that can impact on performance. Performance anxiety, defined as maladaptive emotional state that is typically associated with heightened arousal and interpretation of a situation as threatening and or dangerous. Performance or competitive anxiety can cause athletes to react both physically and mentally in a manner that can negatively affect their performance. Performance anxiety can manifest its way in two ways: physical or somatic, the anxiety, butterflies, sweating, nausea, etc. Mental or cognitive anxiety, the worrying, negative thoughts, confusion, lack of concentration. We see this with policing as well. Like I said, the difference is that can be a life or death situation. Mental fatigue as a biological state caused by prolonged periods of demanding cognitive activity has shown negative influence in physical performance. Mental fatigue negatively impacts on sporting performance. So we can see that there's changes in levels that occur in this situation that can be dangerous, in particular for police. And it's the same with athletes. But what we see, perceived associations to mental fatigue, disengagement, decreased motivation, increased display of emotion, changes in concentration, decreased discipline, etc. And feelings of an active or full brain. Some of the perceived causes of mental fatigue include study and work commitments, repetitive tasks, overanalysis, overthinking, environmental instability, length of duration of activities, etc. On the right, you'll see the inverted U hypothesis, and that essentially proposes that increases in arousal have positive effect on performance up to a certain point, after which continued increases in arousal detrimentally affect performance. So here we have techniques to enhance performance. And so we have attention control, both internal and external, essentially thoughts, internal dialogue, feelings of movement. External attention is when the athlete focuses on things outside of their body. Self-instructions, messages or short affirmations that we tell ourselves to help motivation or concentration. Relaxation, which most of us know about. A mental representation. And this is something that I did a lot of when I was doing sport, is working through scenarios and situations that may affect me in what I might be coming up with. The same, we need to do a lot more of that in terms of policing. And visualization, again, the same thing, visualizing, getting the senses working and getting a feeling so that when you go into an environment that perhaps is foreign and things happen, you can control that. So finally, some of the implementation, some mental agility testing upon joining and continually through a career. And I put up there the McQuaid as an example to measure general mental agility, speed, thought, and other aspects. Quiet eye training, some of you be aware of that. It's a technique to improve tasks requiring highly focused visual attention. Use of scientifically validated cognitive training to increase brain performance, enhance hand-eye coordination and response time under duress. A good system that I use is the cognitive training neurotracker system. Understanding the relationship between sleep and hygiene, and I use the MIT RISE app in that sense. Expanding situational awareness capacity through peripheral vision enhancement training. understanding nutrition and its impact on the brain, and highlighting coping mechanisms and techniques. That's just a real quick overview in sense of what we could be doing more of. And I know some departments are, but not many are. But I think at the end of the day, what that does is give the police officer a greater arsenal of tools to be able to perform their duties, but also to be able to prepare themselves for any action, and also post recovery in terms of being involved in stressful situations. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Grant. And we'll now move on to Dr. Hesketh. Ian.
Hello, everybody. Okay. I'm Dr. Ian Hesketh. I'm the National Police Wellbeing Service Lead for Wellbeing in the UK at the College of Policing. I'm just going to talk to you about some studies we've done on the effects of sleep and fatigue just recently. So reporting on what we've done in terms of research and how we've put that into practice. So quite a short presentation, but I think you'll see it's pretty impactful. And really what I want to labour and the take home from this is that putting research into practice is what we're all about with this. So just a bit of history for you. The National Police Wellbeing Service is unique. It's specifically designed to meet the needs of policing over here in the UK, but we have taken lots and lots of information and knowledge from our people. Lots of you are on this actual panel, actually. So it's a huge thank you for us for that. We represent over 200,000 blue light workers in the UK. That's around policing. And of late, we've expanded out into other emergency service responder work as well, and looking at how we can adapt these concepts to those. Our cycles here, as you can see in the picture there, what we do is take research, we scan, develop, we try to deliver it, and then very importantly, we develop more and more research as we go on after evaluation. And again, you'll see within the outer circle there's a huge onus on communication and engagement, which we like to do. I'll make these slides available after, so you can see our 7-point delivery plan there on the right hand side as well. We work with a network of stakeholders from different universities and both public and private industry as well. And I want to point out 3 which are involved with this sleep study. So the first one here is, this is Professor Les Graham from Durham University in the UK. And what Les and his team have done is provide us with a National Police Wellbeing Service survey of all police personnel in the UK for 2 years now. So what I'm going to report on now is some of the findings from the 2019, which was just pre-COVID actually, survey of policing, which led us to do this research. And the research was conducted by Professor Steve Lockley here, who works between Harvard and the UK.
Ian, we can't see your slides, mate.
Can you not? I'm really sorry for that, Grant. I can't. I don't know you would rectify that, but if I just say Steve Lockley is at Harvard, and he. I'll just try and share that screen again with you. Well,
there's coming now.
Is that coming now?
Yeah.
Right.
So if you start the presentation.
Yeah. Okay. So that's Dr. Les Graham. This is Professor Steve Lockley, and this is Lois and Steve James from Washington State University. So they've been instrumental in doing this research on sleep for us. So if I start with Professor Graham's research, what he found in the wellbeing survey, which it was just under the 35,000 responses, so that's quite a big proportion. It represents around 18% of the UK policing population in England and Wales. What they found is that the 45% of police officers are getting less than 6 hours sleep each night. So that was of some serious concern to us, and we further brought that down into disturbed sleep and in terms of police officers and police staff. And as you can see here, these are pretty big numbers. So it's something that we can look at. In terms of some American research here by Brian Weiler and the team over there at Washington, we can see some of the short-term impacts of sleep-related fatigue in terms of fatigue-related impairment, complex stressful situations, and the ability to form sound judgments. We also see that it reduces attentiveness, perspective and understanding, impairs physical and cognitive functioning, narrows perception, increases anxiety and fearfulness, and worsens mood, and finally increases irritability and hostility. So what we're trying to make out here is a case that this is really important stuff. And obviously, when we look at these things, they lead to all sorts of things. One of these is such as driving fatigue, where people are crashing. The amount of kit that people have in their vehicles is enormous at the moment, which creates lots of distractions. So what we're trying to do out of the research is put together some education and training things. So we have an Oscar Kilo driving experience here, which we put in simulators into the back of some of these vehicles, so we can show people just what the risks are. I appreciate we're tight for time here, but again, these are pictures of what the actual intervention would look like. And we've also engaged with lots of different people to deliver sleep science to our people as well, through webinars, seminars, podcasts, and the like for that. So if you want to have a look at it, the research is available here on the Oscar Kilo web page, which is at Fatigue and Shift Work. Thank you very much, and I'll look forward to hearing the rest of the presentations.
Thank you very much, Ian.
Thanks, Richard.
We'll move on now to Chief Dale McPhee, please. Welcome.
Thanks, Richard, and I appreciate that. And I'll just kind of build on what my colleagues have said and kind of take it to a bit of a practical application in the Edmonton Police Service. Like Grant, I was an athlete some time ago as well. And, you know, for me, and I was also a coach at a fairly high level with sports, and, you know, the rest of the background speaks for itself. But to me, this is kind of the old athlete mentality, is where, you know, we used to have the shirts for the high level soccer team that I coached, character, courage, and commitment. And that's where it meets the path of what we're doing in the Edmonton Police Service with the P3, which is purpose, partners, and proactive. So as Grant said, and as Caddy mentioned, resilience and training, I think more than ever right now, we're in this environment. We're just going through probably a year that we'll hopefully never have to go through. Obviously, the world economy is uncertain. COVID-19 is crazy right now. And then, of course, in policing, we went through George Floyd, and we still continue to go through many of these. So what does that mean in policing, and how are we going to have to get ahead of this, and what's coming our way in the next wave? So in Edmonton Police Service, taking a lot of what my distinguished colleagues have mentioned and trying to put that into practical application has been the challenge, which we seem to be making some progress. It really is in 4 particular areas. The first one that I'd like to talk about is early intervention. So we've set things that obviously recognize when a person or one of our members actually potentially could be having some trouble. So we use that for a talk to see how they're doing, see if they're okay, see if we need to intervene in any kind of method. What does that look like in a police service? You know, that certainly could look like how many PSB, which are public complaints against the individual, could be driving offenses in relation to traffic tickets they have, could be in how many traumatic events or calls that they've went through. And there's a bunch of several others, but those are actually trigger points for intervention, saying, okay, do we need to intervene, see what's going on, or some things that we actually can prevent the long-term problems. And of course, then we have the next piece, which is the reintegration program. So when there's a traumatic event or a combination of events that have been traumatic, we have a reintegration program. We've got a group of professionals that are well trained. Actually, they're training several other police services across the world right now. And that's really focusing on self-awareness, you know, greater understanding what your trigger points are, trying to get them to a place where they can re-enter the workforce. but not without, seeing a psychologist, not without working with our staff, not without having the appropriate supports in place to ensure that they have some resilience and capacity to go back into that environment. This is something that we've had a lot of success with. It's actually worked reasonably well, but that again isn't enough. So then we go on to number 3, and this is the area that we've restructured our police service right now, because how police are handling victims. Keep in mind, we all hear in criminal aspect is an individual is okay till they put them back into the same environment and then they get hurt again or they become affected again. We're trying to do that in the way we have our service delivery model too, looking at the same approach. It goes beyond the trauma-informed training, but certainly that's a start. We've created a community safety and well-being bureau, which we're working with our partners that collect data and measure data to actually how we can help the members of the public that are also going through these traumatic events. Because if we don't reduce this on both ends, really what we're doing is we're trying to fix our individuals or our people, and we're putting them back into the same environment. And we're 3,000 sworn and civilian members, city a little over 1 million. So it's absolutely critical that we look at it in that component too, which is a lot of what the things in relation to George Floyd, et cetera, are based around, is how do we do things differently with that vulnerable population in that space. So that's part 3. I would say we're well on our way. We've established the structure. We've got good metrics, good measurement in place. We've now got data in relation to how we can actually track some of the interventions, how we're stopping not just the first call, but the 10th call, the 20th call, and the 50th call, how we're actually better measuring and doing that, because those are the same circumstances that in a lot of cases have led our individuals to that traumatic experience. And then the 4th piece that we're currently figuring out how to build out is how do we take everything that we've talked about and how do we take that upstream and build resilience, as Grant mentioned, in recruiting. And, because here you got recruiting, they're young, some of them are naive, some of them don't have the same experience, but they actually haven't experienced some of those things police work does. So now trying to figure out, talking to our folks in our unit to figure out just, is that a block 3, which is the 3rd training phase, which they have some practical experience so we can actually start the case. And I want to be very clear, that's not just on the trauma of dealing with the public, but that's the trauma that some of our organizations create, because that trauma within police services is significant too. Things at administration, public complaints, moving people around, people not feeling like they have a voice, people feeling like they're a number. In large organizations, these are also important, as Kathy would tell you, and things that we picked up from her along the way. That organizational stress is actually equally as important as the traumatic event stress. So that's what we're doing at Edmonton Police Service, trying to take some of this and make it a practical application. We're well on our way to building all components of these. We see all components very important because at the end of the day, not everybody has the same stressors. And the only way, back to, mention what my colleagues, all of them have said is, that's partially what you can do to actually better prepare us through training and building resilience. So that's a little snapshot of what we're doing at Edmonton Police Service. And measuring it as we go. And certainly we've hired a lot of talent in our organization to bring things that are a lot beyond policing. But again, back to the timing, it's never been more important than now. So we're feeling okay, somewhat sometimes good of where we're going, but like everybody else, we got a lot of work to go. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dale. Konstantinos, I think we're on next.
All right, thank you. I didn't prepare any PowerPoint slides, so I will try to keep you guys engaged by just talking. So the topic is quite broad, and I'm happy that I'm amongst those great panelists here today to discuss this important topic for law enforcement. And in my work now, I combine this kind of clinical work and research as well as policy helping law enforcement. And in the past, I had different types of experiences as I did work with law enforcement. I can recall last year I was in ride-alongs with a police officer in New Haven, Connecticut, we responded to a critical incident. It was a child abuse case. So the officer actually responds. He talked to the child, talked to the family. We de-escalated the situation. After then social service actually came to the place. After we finish, we go back to the police car. I say, you know what, you did a great job today. He's like, it's part of work, not a big deal. And those are these kind of moments when you come and you get this kind of aha moments or this kind of inspiring moments, and you come to the point to realize what we discussed before about compassion satisfaction. How these parts actually are missing when actually you realize that many times, officers who patrol, officers who are in the front line, they are actually missing to see the value of this kind of amazing work they do for the communities. Other kind of experience, I talked to a very good friend of mine. He is a retired sergeant now, somewhere in Canada. And he was telling about his experiences in resilience and wellness trainings. And he was like, you know what, Doc? Too much analysis brings paralysis. We had, this kind of theoretical kind of presentations, but we were missing actually to see this kind of hands-on practical experience. What exactly resilience is, and how are you going to promote wellness? So all these kind of great questions that come actually from frontline officers, and I'm happy that we discuss here today. So coming from that, me and the wonderful collaborators that I have and been working over the last years, including some of the people in the panel here, we started to create a whole kind of framework of what we call the try to connect resilience, wellness, and performance, as well as ethical behavior. What we came up with the idea of the Power Book, which actually we realized that resilience and wellness can't be in a vacuum and needs to be actually intertwined and connected with ethical behavior, moral behavior, performance, and it needs to be approached from different kinds of perspectives. So we had, a couple of years ago, we published a theoretical foundation of this type of work. And we recently published actually an article of about 45 pages. I'm happy to share with the people, whoever wants to read the article, and I'm happy to send you the reference of it. And we actually create this kind of theoretical foundation of how those kind of concepts are intertwined. And over the last year, we've been working hard, and we are in the process to publish the manual, the Power Manual, which is actually going to get published by the APA, the American Psychological Association. And what the manual does is we actually show and we present answers on how to do it, how to promote compassion satisfaction, how to promote resilience. And we develop a step-by-step guide focusing on different kinds of areas, like we have the physical, emotional, cognitive, spiritual, social part of wellness and resilience, and what people need to do to actually promote that and how they can actually work on that. So we literally develop this kind of evidence-based step-by-step guide on how to do that with this kind of hands-on practical exercises, hands-on kind of practical cases and experience. And we also present actual cases of law enforcement work. So people talk about their cases, what they experience, how they experience, let's say what kind of physical responses they got, what helped them. And then we go and present a step-by-step guide on helping first the physical part, the emotional part, cognitive part, spiritual, social. So it's this kind of, collective kind of presentation of different kinds of areas of work, and this kind of nice synthesis of how we can actually promote wellness and resilience. So it's this type of work that is coming up at the end of October, November, I think, and it's one of the major efforts that attempt to present this kind of tangible ways and help people to find answers on how to promote wellness and resilience. So that's another part of work, and please stay tuned to, I'm happy to share the resources and the manual when it's coming up. And the last part that I would like also to inform the panel and our participants, the amazing special edition that is coming up from Frontier Journal, and Katia actually is one of the co-editors. We're very happy for that. And we have about, I think, 25 articles and more than 95 authors at this point who actually present their work on resilience and wellness. So I think our actually field is making a difference, and we're moving forward to find answers in all those big questions about protective factors, risk factors, how to change that, what to do. But we still have a long way to go, but I think we make progress. And last thing, because I'm not sure about the time, if we have enough time left, at some point I made a presentation to a large police department somewhere in northeastern US. So the chief actually comes to me and says, do you feel like we're making progress in wellness and resilience in policing? And I say, well, if we were back in the 70s and 80s, I wouldn't have been here presenting to you guys right now. So that actually, the fact that you actually called me to make a presentation here, that shows that we're making a progress. Of course, we have a long way to go and many steps coming forward, but seeing where we come from and how things progress in our field, I'm very hopeful, and I see all this kind of amazing progress that we're making, including this great panel that we have here today. So thank you very much for your attention and your time.
Thank you very much, Konstantinos. We'll now move to Chief Peterson. Paul, would you like to give us your presentation?
I'll try. I'll ask, can you see that presentation? Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
No.
Okay. Now I've lost everything, haven't I? Are you there again?
No, we still haven't seen it. So
Okay, I'll not share my screen. I can run a police department, but Zoom and PowerPoint stresses me out. Sorry about that. Full disclosure as well, I'm not an athlete. I do like to watch sports and I do like to drink beer. I'll start off and say the slide presentation, just a few slides, just a few bullet points that certainly will be available afterwards. I kind of titled it Greater Sudbury Police Member Supports Lessons of Learning and Empowerment. And I want to be clear that the learning is my learning. This is me, a learning journey that I'm on, and an empowerment story that is really one of those lessons. Let good people do good work and get out of the way. And so, I'll start off by saying Greater Sudbury Police Service, we're pretty proud of the various member supports that we currently have in place, and probably not unlike what most modern police services have now. Initially, many of them were in place because of legislative requirements. In our province here in this country, a few years ago, thanks to advocacy from both police leadership and police associations, the legislation changed to where post-traumatic stress disorder demonstrated by police officers is presumed to have helped come from the workplace. That was important because it got people into treatment quickly without having to go through those additional barriers of having to argue what was the root cause of the trauma. That was important. Of course, that wasn't enough, because just because they get in there, was the system able to, and is the system able to handle them? And we saw a lot of increased awareness, both internally and externally, lots of more conversations about internal and external support, primarily organization driven, primarily driven out of our human resources branch. We struggled and continue to struggle with early intervention, with access to service, and even today continue to struggle with stigma and the culture, the culture of the organization, our organization that still exists today. Along comes an individual in our organization. I mentioned him a little bit last time when we were in Scotland. Hope to bring it off the page a little more today. It's a member with lived experience, moral injury after a fatal on-duty shooting. He was involved in the system, involved in a return to work plan, and it wasn't successful. In fact, he was at the stage where it was determined that policing would no longer be a career of choice for him. And he was just about to be moved into a position, a non-police position, when he came up with a great idea. He got some treatment, he got the right treatment. And as a police constable, he knocked on my door. I didn't really know him because this fatal shooting happened before I came to this police service. So it was basically a stranger knocking, a constable stranger knocking on the door of the chief of police. And he's got a proposal to me. He's got a proposal that is a job, and he's the one that's going to take on the job. And it was a health and wellness coordinator, very innovative. He spoke about how the things that he was hearing from some of the people in the front line were the same things he remembers, and that he could connect and relate to those individuals and essentially shepherd our peer support program and help coordinate that. The toughest decision that I had to make on the day was to say yes, and it was a no-brainer. There was some resistance, a little bit of, oh, really? We can't just create a position for a constable, and he can't wear a gun. What are we going to do? All of those we were able to overcome, and through him, we have now built that standalone member support and wellness unit. And I think it was probably from the panelists here that I heard the last time when we were in Edinburgh about having to create that as separate from the human resources branch. And through him, that was created. In our organizational chart, which is hierarchical and a pyramid, this unit stands as a circle and touches everything. And it is complete member driven. It's people with lived experience, involves talks, outreach, referrals. Nobody there takes on the role of counselor. All of them take on the role of support. We've now got an internal website. We've got apps for services that are available, and it's extended out to help family members. So for me, the lesson learned is this is really about making sure that it's not driven by the top, but supported from the top. None of these things are formal directives that come from the desk of the chief. They're peer-driven and self-driven through encouragement and empowerment. It's led from people that have credibility. There might have been a time in my police career when I had credibility. It's gone. And so there's others now that have it. I've got a beautiful slide of a beautiful tree that has all of the different pieces of our member support program that'll be available. And that is, of course, our human resource branch still has a role to play, but that's a role that was driven as a story of success from somebody having the courage. And we talk about our rich values in Greater Sudbury Police Service of respect, inclusivity, courage, and honesty. Having the courage to come and knock on the door of the chief of police and say, I've got a job description and I'm the individual for the job. So with that, thank you very much. Very humbled to follow in the footsteps of people on this panel.
Thank you very much, Paul. Tom, no, we now move to Grant. Would you speak for Katrina, please, Grant?
Yes, I certainly will, and I'll be quick. Katrina sends her apologies in the sense that, oops, sorry, start again. She's actually in another part of Australia as we stand. Oh, wrong slide. Delivering on the AFP Shield program, which when I get my PowerPoint correct, I'll do it this way. There we go. Okay. It's not going to work. All right, oh dear. Let me try and do that without the notes on the bottom. There we go. So most recently, the AFP was provided funding to be able to develop a program such as the SHIELD program, which is really quite innovative in the way that it's been developed. And Katrina is the orchestrator of that. And it's a health model implemented by the Australian Federal Police. And I'm actually on the advisory group with a number of people that are on this presentation. And I'm proud to say that the SHIELD is grounded in evidence and shifts the focus to prevention and early intervention. And it's graphically represented as we can see it here. The team that developed this concept conducted a thorough literature review, interviewed countless law enforcement agencies across the world and examined industry. Most importantly, they also asked police, what do you want? What type of health and wellbeing support do you need? And the police responded, we want an on-point, tightly integrated, highly visible, healthy capability. We want local services and local people who we know and trust. And that's a huge element. This is what SHIELD will deliver. SHIELD is a holistic model that integrates physical, psychological, and social health with a high-performing sports model. It will deliver prevention, early intervention, treatment, and transition services as shown in the slide. It'll support law enforcement officers throughout their career, from recruit right through to retirement. And transition points also along the way. SHIELD will provide services to former members and families, recognising the critical value both these groups bring to support health. As I said, unfortunately, Katrina can't be here and couldn't join us today, but her contact details are below. And if you would like to seek further information on SHIELD, and Katrina looks forward to presenting at LEP next time to share some early insights and evaluations on the program. And I'll leave it there, Richard.
Thanks very much, Grant. And maybe we can come back to some other aspects of that in the discussion period. So if we can now ask Tom to give his presentation, please, Tom.
Okay, thanks, Richard. And thank you very much for the opportunity to participate on the panel. Obviously, lots of very capable and knowledgeable people I'm with. So my observations are just going to come from about just over 20 years, probably closer to 25 years now, I guess, of representing police officers, frontline police officers, police personnel, both sworn and civilian. Locally, in my own home jurisdiction, I'm a police officer in Vancouver originally, but also provincially. So in Canada, my home province is British Columbia, then nationally. And then I've had a lot of opportunity to interact with colleagues, my colleagues doing similar work internationally, and which gives me a good sense, I think, of what some of the challenges are. And what I think a lot of what I'm going to say is probably going to echo or reflect what's already been said. The one thing I'm glad to hear actually is we have a long way to go. I think there's a lot of work left to be done, and I feel like we've done a lot. I also feel like we're at a bit of a turning point, or maybe even a bit of a curb, where, because we're having the conversation, unfortunately, I think a lot of people think we're accomplishing a lot more than we are, and I think we need to go further. And I'll just touch on some of those things. The other thing I'll say is, and we've heard some of it from Caddy and Constantinos and others, we know a lot. The one, I think, positive thing is we've done a lot of good research, and I think we have a good sense of what some of the challenges are when it comes to mental health and wellness in policing, and that's a good thing. And so I think there has been a lot of progress, but like I said, I think we have a long way to go. The other thing I wanted to highlight is, maybe over the course of my time in this role as an advocate for police officers, I think we just have to come to terms with the fact that the people that we have working in our organizations are going to be exposed to trauma. There's no way around that. And I just think we have to accept that, rather than trying to find ways, perhaps like we've done historically, where we think we can get away from it. It's just the nature of the kind of work that our people do, and the kind of interactions they have with people who are often vulnerable and are dealing with crises and all kinds of other factors. The other thing is, and Ian does a great job talking about this, but fatigue. it's, again, that's just embedded in the work that our people do. It's a 24/7 operation. Our people work shift work, they work weekends. We'll never be able to staff to meet every unanticipated eventuality that might happen in our communities. So we're always going to rely on overtime. Our people are having to go to court and engage in other activities in addition to their regular responsibilities. And then finally, the other conclusion I've come to over these last number of years is we're always going to be under a tremendous amount of pressure in terms of funding. There are always going to be challenges around resources, which of course then underlie issues related to workload and fatigue. So I think rather than try and think that someday we're going to get ahead of those issues, we just need to accept that they're a reality of the type of work that our people do. So how do we equip them? How do we prepare them to be able to manage those issues? And many of you have already touched on the importance of making our people more resilient. But I think where the shortcoming is and where we need to do a lot more work is how do we embed that in our training at the outset? And Grant, I think, touched on some of the things that we need to be incorporating into the training right from the outset. How do we establish regular training with respect to these important issues that are going to make our people more resilient, both from a mental health perspective, but also from a physical perspective? And how do we embed that in our organizations in a systemic way so that it happens on a regular basis? And then finally, we need to give our people access to appropriate, properly evaluated and effective treatment options. And that needs to happen whether you're working in a rural community, a remote, you're in a remote posting, or even in an urban setting where even though people think there's more capacity, we still have significant challenges getting people to treatment when they need it. So we need to do those things if we want to get ahead of this issue in policing so that we're not seeing the people who are away from work for extended periods of time. We're not seeing people feel like they have no other option than to take their own lives. And we're not seeing the cost, both professionally, but also personally, and the impact on families from individuals who are suffering from serious mental health wellness issues, but also organizationally when we're not healthy organizationally. So I think the gap and what needs to change is these changes that we're talking about, the recommendations that people are making, implementing outcomes from some of the research and the findings that we have. It has to become systemic. What I have seen in organizations right across my country in Canada, but in other countries, there's a champion often, or somebody who's leading an initiative. Some of you have talked about that individual, and that in my view is part of the problem right now, because it's too much of what we're doing in this space is person dependent. We're not making changes like we do when it comes to investigating serious criminal offenses, where we adopt systemic practices around how to better investigate homicides or how to better investigate robberies. We need to take the same approach when it comes to mental health and wellness. And I think if we do that, we'll see much better outcomes. And then the last comment I'll make is we're trying to make some of these changes in a historical cultural construct. And I think that's a barrier or a challenge. We really need to look at redefining what our organizational cultures are going to be about. So if we're talking about things like more diversity and better improved gender equity, how are we building the capacity to allow that to happen and to succeed? We're not doing that. And the example I always fall back on is how we treat our women when it comes to things like maternity and paternity leaves, which is still a significant challenge in policing in just about every country in every democratic country in the world where we have similar police services with the same kind of sort of training and oversight. Fatigue, how we schedule overtime and assign work, very little consideration to the impact on the individual or the impact on that individual's family and how that might play out in terms of from a wellness or mental health perspective. Little consideration of that. Discipline. I can't tell you the number of times I've dealt with disciplinary cases where there have been proper PTSD, OSI, mental health diagnosis, well-known, well-established, but completely ignored when organizations are dealing with those disciplinary issues. How we treat even our people who we determine can no longer continue in policing is horrific. What's the implication of that from an organizational perspective when everyone else sees that? And does that then become a barrier to people coming forward when they need help early on so that we can avoid getting to that kind of an outcome or that kind of a situation in the end? So, we're still significant stigma around, we say, okay, we'll take a break if you need it, but there's still significant stigma when it comes to taking time off. We don't backfill for those vacancies when somebody needs to take a break and get some help. That creates then self-stigma, shaming, those kinds of issues, and we need to get ahead of that. The competitive nature of our organizations where how we promote people and assign people to work becomes a win-lose proposition, and what's the impact on that on wellness and mental health, and often what becomes, again, shame because I wasn't successful. I didn't get that promotion. I didn't get that job I wanted. How are we dealing with those things? We need to rethink leadership and how we're identifying people for leadership positions and moving away from a competency-based system where we focus on what someone did and what they achieved and focus more on character. What are the important leadership characteristics that that person has that will make them successful as a leader? So I think these are all things that we need to have better conversations around and sort of a rethink around if we really genuinely want to change our culture and move to a model that does promote mental health and wellness and gets ahead of some of these significant barriers to having healthy organizations. And I think it's extremely important. It's never been more important. Some of my other panelists have commented on that. And the last thing I'll leave you with, I think, the template's there because I think if we actually treated those people in our own organizations that are vulnerable or are suffering the same way and put the same amount of effort into helping those people as we do helping our vulnerable people in our communities, we'd probably do a lot better and we would be a lot better off. And I'll leave it at that for the purpose of this presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom. And for our final presenter, I'm very pleased to ask Dr. Jeff Thompson to speak. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you very much. Just making sure, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, excellent. So then I better say something important and poignant. Just a quick snapshot of with the massive amount of pressure that I have going last with the group, but I don't want to reiterate what everyone else said. I want to just give it from my own perspective. And looking at the title when I was preparing this, it's the idea of thinking, preparing, training, and having the discipline of elite athletes. Notice it didn't say just athletes, it's elite athletes. And we look at what we're doing, we're not playing sports. But so here's 5 tips or 5 perspectives that can help guide us as individuals and agencies as we go forward. The first one is the key term of resilience and grit. We got to make sure we're not just using these as catchphrases, that they're genuine and how we're applying it, because looking at Angela Duckworth's work, for example, with grit, passion and perseverance equals grit. And people talk about how many times have we heard across our careers about being lucky? Hard work is not lucky. And I like the image, Grant, that you used earlier. When people are at the podium, people don't see all the work that's going on below it. As law enforcement with our mental health and looking after ourselves and each other, as well as protecting the public, we can't rely on luck. We know our chances for positive outcomes greatly increase with the hard work that we put into it. That connects to the second point of the idea of practice and looking at the athlete. And we all know, what Malcolm Gladwell made famous about the 10,000 hours to make somebody an expert. The point that was trying to be made there is just practicing for 10,000 hours. That doesn't make anyone an expert. We have to continually practice with the purpose of getting better. But when we look at that from a resilience and mental health perspective, how are we doing this to make ourselves better? And this is where, look, given the climate of the world, especially in law enforcement, there are plenty of things for us to argue about and disagree with. The following, I don't think is up for argument or disagreement. Mental health should be the priority number one of law enforcement police officers. Who should be saying this? Everybody. Because let's look at this. When the individual police officer is taking care of his or her mental health, first of all, we're human beings. We deserve this. But when we look at what the uniform we put on, when we're better and mentally and physically fit, it makes us do our job better. When there's a collection of us doing this, this makes our agency better. And what are we responsible with doing? Taking care of the public. And this is why I'd say this should be universal. This should be clearly something bringing us together, because there's many things that are polarizing us. Let's look at it from the idea of practice, continual practice with intent to make us better first as human beings who happen to be law enforcement officers. Importantly, as we heard other people say, it needs to be data-driven. We can't have trainings, resilience, practices, programs. They can't be led by anecdotal stories. That's not what real practice is. It needs to be guided by data. And for example, the great work that Ian and Oscar Kilo are doing, clearly leaders. When people are thinking or watching this now live or the archive later, how do we go about it? Don't let that be daunting. Embrace the resilience and realize people have been paving the way. And clearly Ian and his team are people that are doing that. Sherry, who I think was on here as a guest, Fraternal Order of Police, they are clearly doing that. AFP and Katrina doing that. There's others out there. We are a network. We're a brotherhood and sisterhood. Reach out to those people. The path is being laid. Next point, point 3. There's that team concept as elite athletes. There's a role for everybody. You can't do everything. Don't expect to do everything by yourself, looking after your own mental health and as your agency. Internal collaboration is critical, but also collaboration with external. And I'll come back to that in a second. Connecting that team role for everybody and looking at it as far as practice. I just thought of a line that what people used to say in as far as team roles for people that do training. And I don't know if people heard this outside the States, but they say, those that can do it, do it. Those that can't do it, teach or train. And those that can't teach or train, teach gym. And I don't know if anyone laughed at that or not, but it makes me laugh when I say it. I need a good laugh. It's after 5 p.m. We need to make sure that people that are doing the training aren't doing it just for a cushy position, that they're not just doing it perhaps for weekends off. They need to constantly be practicing to get better. And we have to figure out, how do we measure this and making sure that we have the right people guiding. That leads me to point number 4. Leaders set the tone. And this is my thing. This is all connected. We can't, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, I think, is culture. And talk about a massive 800-pound gorilla. Culture is connected to our mental health. Of course, we could go down the nice, soft, easy conversation of talking about fighting stigma and stuff like that. That's not what I'm referring to. Leaders of teams have responsibilities. The coaches, the managers, if they don't get their team to do well, they get fired. I know it doesn't work the same way in law enforcement and policing, but get rid of the bad players, quote unquote. How do we get rid of them? First, either we tell them they need to leave, but also we look at those as people that might need help. And we got to make sure that we're training and giving them opportunities to get better for themselves and that they're not being bad apples anymore. The other thing too is the accountability. And that's sort of my point 5, the accountability of time's ticking. Everything can't be changed at the snap of a finger. We need to be accountable for ourselves. When we talk about culture, how easy is it to blame the agency constantly, this mystical agency that's hiding behind a curtain somewhere? You have to ask yourself, take ownership of it. That goes back to the point 1, the resilience and grit and that elite athlete mindset. What are you doing to take care of yourself? You're part of the culture. Are you taking care of yourself? Mental, physical health continually. That then shows others that it is possible. And then that mindset becomes contagious. Everything we do is contagious. We just need to look at, are our actions, thoughts, behaviors helping or hindering ourselves first and foremost? And then is it spreading to the agency in a positive and negative way? And again, I look at this, I'm sorry, I think I've got 30 seconds more. I'll just end on one other note too, is the way we treat each other. Let's make sure, and I'm not speaking to anybody directly, maybe I'm saying this as a reminder myself, let's make sure we're backing our talk up with action. And let's just make sure, if our job is trying to build better relationships with the public, let's make sure we do step 1 in-house. Let's make sure we're treating each other all with respect, the respect that we all deserve. And that again will help us be better police out there on the street. And last thing I will say is this is awesome to be part of this panel. And with our resilient mindset, we can't do this in person in Philly, but we didn't give up, any of us. Let's not forget that. We figured out a way to still do this. And that's all perspective, resilience, and great as well. And that's better than elite athletes. We're elite law enforcement. So cheers to everybody. And I'm glad to be here with all of you.
Thanks very much, Jeff. Well, I was looking through the questions area, and it seems that the questions that have been raised have been answered, but hang on, there's one other that's come up, I think. Let me see. No, I don't see any new questions there. We're well within our time, so I was wondering if we'd like to open it up for kind of general comments and discussion among all of the participants. So if you want to unmute your selves, then we could have a kind of open discussion.
They won't be able to do that unless they raise their hand first, Richard. All the attendees are muted unless I admit them. So if you raise your hand, I can allow you to talk or ask a question in the Q&A and we can get to it.
Okay, thanks, Richard.
And we have Isa's got her hand up here, so she's good to go, I think.
I think Isabel.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ken.
I feel like saying good morning because you make me wake up so early in the morning to follow all of your sessions here in Australia. That's not fair. I have thoroughly enjoyed all of your contributions, and I put all of my questions in the chat. Thanks for answering them. I feel like every single conference that we go to and that we organize, we come up with all of those ideas around how to boost the resilience of our police officers, and that we keep banging our head on the wall of that's not important, that's not important, they need to do this, they need to be able to fill in that freaking form that anyone could fit in. You know, I literally sat in a session where a police officer said anyone who's older than 6 could fill in that form, and they spent 8 hours on that form. So I think that there's an awful lot of training at recruit level that's being wasted on operational and protocol things when we need to build up the resilience of our police officers in the first place in order to be in that preventative early intervention space. So I'd really like to get some of your opinions about how we really go over that bridge of saying, no, we need to have healthy, resilient police officers in the first place who feel comfortable doing their job before asking them to do really what is extremely intricate problem solving in the field. I know this is not an easy question, but you're here to answer it anyway.
Thanks, Isa. We'll see who would like to respond to you then. Dale?
Sure, I'll give it a whirl. It's great to hear from you. I hope you're doing well. And just texting with Caddy, we miss you. Your question is one that we're actually, as I mentioned in my presentation, trying to deal with right now because, and I think Tom has hit on it too, just not just in recruit training, but how we promote leaders and how we actually look at leadership that is not afraid to make a bit of a difference. So I think we're in the early stages, and I think part of this is from the data that we've learned through the interventions, through the data that we're learning through integration, and what we're actually looking at. Our Community Safety and Wellbeing Bureau will actually help us pave that path, not only to get the right things in place, but through integration. So, the opposite to that sometimes is we spend a lot of time, and I'll just give you the Edmonton Police Service example. A few years back, I think about 4 years ago, we had 12% of our recruits coming from underrepresented groups within our community. Now we're up to 60%. The problem is now, though, what we actually need to make sure we do is that we don't train that innovation out of them. And I think that's also lays true when it comes to building that resilience piece. We have many people coming in relation to professional experience that have something to offer in this space. So I kind of see it almost like if you were doing an IT system where you have your one main component and then everything has to start bolting on. I think we're in the ability to bolt on, the ability to start to put some of this resilience, problem solving, what to expect, from the organizational pressures, and actually give them a good shot of that, or a good dose of that. Not right in recruit training, but probably we're broken out into 3 blocks, but possibly in the 3rd block, once they've been out on the street a little bit and they've experienced what they're going to be dealing with. I think we have the ability to put some of that into that block 3 training, with obviously professionals such as yourself who would be very helpful with this, and others on the call. But then I think that's even not enough. We got to bring that into some of our general duty training and some of our GDMs, which are these days in a year, because this is going to be something that we constantly have to reinforce. And then it just becomes, as you've heard Paul and you've heard Tom and others and Grant speak about, it's also about making it cool. Like, you need to be cool when the cool kids aren't cool. And we have some work in relation to do on that, and, experiences that Ian would have in the college and others. I get a lot out of these things, because every time we talk, you beg, borrow, and steal from somebody else, right? And I think the other piece that we're not leveraging, why I like LEPH and why we've been all in since day one, is we got to start stealing from each other, so we're not reinventing the wheel. Stealing might not be the right word in police language, but at the end of the day, is the answers are here. What we haven't done is take some of the good things you're doing, some of the good things we're doing, some of the good things that are being done in Australia, some of the good things that are being done in the UK, because it's really the same. They're all facing the same things. It's trauma. And, I've been fortunate to speak at the World Health in Mexico, and I've been pretty much all over the world. And the issues aren't race-based. That's the solutions. The issues are the behaviors that come with this that are triggering this. So I think we're on the verge of some breakthroughs. And for Edmonton, we've really seen it exposed with COVID. It's really seen not only our EFAS calls go up, but the fiber of the community, normal people, have broken down. So examples of that, the trauma in the homes, the domestic violence is shooting up right across the world right now. So that's trauma, and that's going to play out with somebody taking a call or with something else. So I think the studies that we do in the next year here and will go a long ways in getting some of this done. But I think the other piece that before I conclude, is we got to stop being afraid to fail. Failure is what we have, and we got to try to use innovation. And innovation means that we might not get it right the first time, but there's enough checks and balances in place to correct it and make it better. Kind of like a franchise, the first franchise that was built, whether it's in the food industry or anything else, probably isn't as good as the 10th and the 20th. And I think we have the ability to leverage ourselves in Canada, Australia, Tasmania, UK, US. We're not using that competitive advantage to drive us all to a better place, in my opinion. Hope that helps. And I will be calling on you once we get there.
I left you unmuted, Isabel, in case there's any follow-up.
I think your hand's up, Richard.
Okay, yeah, you're still unmuted, Isabel. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm still on. Oh, thank you. Sorry, I was trying to be very silent. Thanks, Dale. I really appreciate that. I'll be there when you reach out. I just really feel so excited to hear you all talk, but at the same time also so disheartened by observing the kind of progress that we could make and seeing how Kylo is just rocking the beat at the moment in the UK, and we've got such little progress here in Australia being done. So I just feel really ambivalent about all of this, simply because I really feel like, as Jeff was saying, the importance is that a police officer who is well and healthy will do a really good job, especially in front of people who are unwell and not healthy. And if we don't have our priorities right, we will not get that operational work right. And I think Paul mentioned that as well. So I really thank you for this. It's been a whirlwind of ideas in my head while you were all talking.
Richard, could I just say something?
Please.
Yeah, Isa, thanks for the questions. In the UK here, what we have, of course, is probably like most of you, I don't want to speak on behalf of everybody here, but the media just report the sort of razzmatazz violent exchanges that take place. We've just done a second survey of all police officers and police staff in the UK here, which will be published in about a month's time now. And things are really improving for officers and staff here. They're feeling an immense feeling of meaning and purpose in the working life, and the majority are enjoying the role. Unfortunately, the media depictions are of, you know, the violence and a police van being set on fire and things like that, and then protests here and there. But I must say, it doesn't represent the whole of the country by any means. The majority of the country are very compliant and very happy that the COVID seems to be this latest wave of COVID seems to be passing, and they're grateful for emergency services. They're grateful for the work the NHS and the scientists have done, and people aren't as down as I think some of the media depictions create. So I'm probably guessing that's the same around the globe. But I think we mustn't get disheartened. But one of the things that we need to just be very mindful of is that people who are thinking about careers in policing are obviously influenced by these media depictions. So we need to be really careful that we have interventions in place, which we've all spoken about today, which actually help people if they start to struggle with these things. And I think everybody on this call has highlighted interventions that would help any officer or police staff members that are struggling. So I think there's a lot to be really happy and optimistic about. And although there's lots of heartache and sadness out there, there is a lot to look forward to as well, and a lot to be very proud of in policing.
Thanks, Ian. Any other comments from our panel members? Yes, Paul.
I just want to build a bit on Dale's comment about failure, and I don't disagree. And I think Tom would probably agree with this here in Canada, and build on what Ian's just saying. The challenge is any perception of failure by our front line is magnified through the media, through social media, not just locally, provincially, nationally, internationally. I'm one of those police services, I say that I'm too big to be small and too small to be big. We're a city, but everybody knows everybody. And so if I've got an officer, just recently I had an officer arrested for impaired driving, everybody knows that man's name. You know, he has a hard time, and that trial is followed all the way through. And so I just, you know, I think that the willingness to accept failure, and I keep talking about discipline, Tom, maybe you and I have talked about this in a taxi ride somewhere. There certainly, in my view, is a difference between mistake and misconduct, and the two of them need to be treated differently. And even the misconduct still has to be treated with respect. I just sometimes, and I'm just speaking personally here, I sometimes feel like our profession is held to the standard of perfection. And I don't know that any of us can ever live up to that. I just recently read an article that 99.9% of all encounters between police and the public in Canada result in absolutely no use of force. You wouldn't know that if you watched the media. And I like the idea of experimentation. I like the idea of trying on some intervention strategies. I'm not saying I'm risk averse. I'm just saying it's hard, I think, for our front line to accept, you know, from the top, go ahead and fail. We've got your back when it gets amplified that much.
Well, it not only gets amplified, but the further challenge is that our political institutions and people who represent those institutions in leadership roles, whether they're in an oversight role, whether they're in a governance role, whether they're part of our funding authorities, different levels of government, they're responding to that amplified coverage and whatever tone it takes on in how they're commenting or responding to these issues that Ian touched on, and I think Paul you're alluding to, and that of course has an even greater impact on it amplifies the impact then on those people, the frontline officers and police personnel who are trying to do and who are doing excellent work in communities right across the world every day. But what we hear about are the exceptions, really, which are those negative interactions that happen from time to time, often and not initiated by the actual police officer. So it's a particularly challenging time, I think, and that's why I think if we go back to the start of the conversation and some of Grant's comments, and I think Katie touched on it, or Katie touched on it, and a few others. It is really about, and I think I'm sorry I missed the name of the person who asked the question, but it is really about how we prepare people coming into our organizations, how we equip them to be able to manage these issues, which are in fact part of being a police officer in the 21st century. How do we then provide regular training and updates with respect to these issues? And then how do we give them access so that when they are feeling a bit overwhelmed, no matter how well prepared they are, they can get the support that they need from in a clinical setting or whatever other setting, so they can be successful, not just professionally, but also personally. And I think that's the challenge of the 21st century is let's just acknowledge that we have these, this is not going to change. So how do we give our people the best chance to succeed?
Thanks, Tom. And any other comments?
Richard, if I may, I don't know if it's a question or a comment. It's this is very encouraging to see. I think there's been that the whole issue of mental health and well-being of police and first responders has come a long way. It's been one of the major themes of the Law Enforcement Public Health conferences, probably for 5 of the 6 conferences, and it keeps building. So it's good to see. My concern, of course, is with it becoming the sustainability of it. And I think if Dale gets hit by the beer truck on the way home, is it so well entrenched in the Edmonton Police Service that this will continue and survive the change of leadership? And the same with maybe Paul and some of the others. I think it's critical that and I think we're probably getting there eventually, but how do you ensure that it's entrenched and is sustainable?
It's a great question. Probably better chance that I drink all the beer and it would probably have an overdose piece, but I think we're getting there on some of the aspects, and it's trying to, for us, Paul and I are involved in a small group of police chiefs in Canada that we talk regular now, Consortium of Willing, just as we talked about, is how can we actually start to share stuff and how do we start to leverage each other to drive the change? And I mean, Richard, if you think back when one of the ideas that, back in Prince Albert when we had hubs and we built hubs, and there's been presentations on these at LEPH, we basically went to Scotland and we took the Scotland piece from Karen and John Carnahan, and we tried to build the second iteration of that. And then we took it to our province and we institutionalized the core principles like a franchise. And then what we did is we'd die if we just tried to build it from the inside. And then we took it to the province of Ontario, who took it to another level. When they took it to that level, we became competitive and say, okay, we got to do what's next. We got to get into the AI, the data analytics, and we got to look at stuff like that. I think that's one thing, and I don't know if Nick is still on the line, but I think that's one thing that we could use LEPH to help us do, is because your own provinces and your own police services always try to bring in an expert from somewhere else. And I've been that expert from somewhere else. And quite frankly, you get there and they're doing some pretty good and some pretty cool stuff. But we don't create the environment to actually push this to make it bigger than it is and make it more sustainable. So I actually think this vehicle of LEPH, my own personal opinion, folks like Caddy and others on the line here, we have the ability to start to almost make this part of the fabric. And you know, you look at somebody like Tom, he represents a lot of police officers in this country, and we have some public health specialists here. I mean, I've long since advocated, and I said it again in a presentation you were on yesterday, I think the missing piece here is the law enforcement public health partnership that's there to stay. Because if you get that right, you'll shrink social services by 20 or 30% tomorrow, because one has the ability to engineer and one has the ability to reverse engineer. And we don't take that to the next level like we can. So I think the future's bright. But to Issa's point, and not to be lost, this is all about leadership. Stop wasting our time with the people that aren't ready to go. Let's get the 10, the 15, the 20 that are in both sectors, and let's go. And we'll fail, but we'll build the airplane in the air, and it'll be a pretty good airplane when we're done putting it all together.
I guess that goes to my point a bit about what happens to you if it's entrenched enough to do that. I think as far from the public health side of things, I'm just looking at the attendees, and probably half the GLEFA board is sitting in the attendees side right now. Nick is there. This has, as I said, has been a major theme for the conference for the last 5 of the 6 conferences, and it's continuing to build. And I think from the law enforcement public health association side of things and the conference side of things, we'll keep pushing the agenda and keep bringing together the good people like we have here at this panel. What an excellent panel. This is great. So we'll keep working on that partnership to develop that. And Nick hasn't got his hand up yet, so we'll see if he has anything to say.
There's a few more minutes for him to do that, Richard.
Yes,
so.
Absolutely.
But in the meantime, I'd just like to add what you were saying, and I think all of you have given some fascinating comments about your experiences and recommendations this afternoon. And I think one of the challenges for us all, particularly those of us who are involved in working with police academies and dealing with the new recruits, is to integrate these kind of lessons into how we train and what we train and how we sustain it as they go through their careers. So I think this has all been very, very valuable. And I think another challenge for us, and maybe it's something that LERP is going to take on in the future, Richard, and that is making sure that we collect these ideas and then put them out so that they're available to a much wider audience. But I really appreciate all the comments and good discussion we've had. So thank you.
We have Nick now. I'm just going to allow him to talk. So he should be on with us in a second.
Good.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I am ever so grateful you can't see my my photo, my picture.
Well, we know who you are.
Yeah, I know, but it's very early here, as you said. 2 comments, Dale. From my experience of trying to generate interest in this law enforcement public health partnership area, one is that we're still at the stage of the agenda being driven by people around their full-time jobs. That we're still at the stage, depending on people who are trying to carve out a bit of time extra to the demands of their jobs. And I think everyone on the panel would agree that those demands are just getting worse and worse. And I think for some strange reason, worse under lockdown. The second comment is that I'm still where I was when I first got involved in this area, and that is facing the challenge of getting enthusiastic buy-in from the public health side. It's just been remarkable. For me, my experience over the last 8 years or so, the enthusiasm and interest that's coming from the law enforcement side, and the discussion that's gone on this morning is a great example of that. But I'm not hearing the same discussion coming particularly from academic public health, and that's where, for me, the challenge still is.
Well, thanks very much, Nick. You and I have had this kind of discussion before, and I continue to try and push this through my own School of Public Health here. And I think we're making some slow progress, but you're absolutely right that the my public health colleagues generally are not showing the enthusiasm or the interest to get involved in these kind of discussions. And I think as we go forward to really make this as effective as it should be, we need to have much greater buy-in from the public health community, both the academic and the practitioner side of it.
So if I could just add to both your discussion, I think the police need to play a role in bringing that buy-in. So the thing that we've just completed here, which will go public here pretty quick, we've tracked the money in the system. So everybody wants to defund the police. So we're in Edmonton, population of 1 million. Obviously, the city budget's billions. The police budget is, as I said yesterday, 462 million. The social safety net spend in this city alone on an annualized basis is over $7.5 billion. They are not getting outcomes for that money. And the social dysfunction that COVID's exposed, this is actually needs to be a money argument as much as it is a policy argument. Because if the public knows, which we now own the data, if the public knows, some of this stuff will be forced to actually do some mergers and amalgamations. And there's some potential big opportunities, but that ecosystem for change doesn't exist. So we're in a cusp or an opportunity where, I'll give you an example. My police service hired epidemiologists, 2 of them, mathematicians, data modelers, social workers, mental health workers, all with partners, and then just going to put it out and measure the heck out of it. But we've hired more talent. We've built our own accelerator. There's a lot that a police leader can do because it's not an elected body. It's autonomous voice, but it's only powerful when we put it with yours. And that's the key here, because public health and police are both on the front ends of their systems. And we all know that most of the money is spent on the back end of the system. And quite frankly, in our city, by some of the things that we've done, we've artificially increased our crime rate. And I can guarantee you that's happened in pretty much every big city in the world. Not all of it, but some of it. And that's where the opportunities are.
Thanks, Dale. And we've still got a few minutes left, but Katie, can we come back to you and see if you have any other comments to make?
I think that I'm always so happy with this wonderful session, and I do concur with all the comments. And as we say, health is health, whether we're talking about our mental health and physical health. And I think that here, as we had really much focus, is about, again, a holistic approach to our care, about a whole person management approach, and very much appreciating that system approach in terms of not only the individual, but then again the operational stressors, the organizational stressors. And I think that, again, everything we talked about, best thing I think about it is really it does have an appreciation of, again, when we talk about prevention, because prevention is very much on a continuum of care, primary, secondary, and tertiary. And we need to develop interventions at both individual worker level and, of course, at the organizational level. So I think that here, putting all those sessions together makes it very much comprehensive and very much aligned with the prevention continuum of care.
Thanks, Katie. And Konstantinos, do you have any comments before we run out of our time?
I would definitely would like to place emphasis on the holistic approach, like Katie said, and that's my whole philosophy in working with so many law enforcement agencies and colleagues all around US, Canada, Europe. I see all this kind of type of philosophy that needs to develop and grow in police organizations, the holistic approach to wellness and resilience.
Thanks, Konstantinos. And Jeff, do you have any other comments, please? Questions?
Yeah, sure. Just the one quick thing I'll say is, let's be realistic with this approach and with resilience. And again, the great work that Ian and others have done, and I know Konstantinos, you as well. The resilience training needs to start in the academy, and then it needs to continue throughout their whole career. And we're fooling ourselves if we think a 1 hour or even a one-day workshop is covering anything. They still serve a purpose, they're helpful, but the only way to increase and enhance resilience is by practices and doing them continually and making sure they're evidence-based. And that's where it combines. The individual has to do the practices and the agency has to provide it for them throughout their entire career. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. And Paul, any closing comments from you, please?
Just wondering what Dale's up to. No, I mean, I'll say. I'll say, you know, to build on what's been said is, you know, we're not where we were, but we're not where we need to be. And talk without action is dreaming. I like the fact that, you know, there are many people, many agencies, many organizations that are being led by public health and implementing things that are being spoken to by the healthcare professionals here. You know, I'm encouraged. You know, I talked a little bit about, you know, the immense pressures that we're under and, you know, the ability or the tolerance for failure. I still say our people are meeting the standards and exceeding the standards day in and day out, and we got to support them to move forward.
Thanks, Paul. And Tom, do you have any final comments, please? I think you're muted, Tom.
Sorry, you think I would have learned by now. It's only been a year since we've been doing this. You know, it's a great conversation, and I think to Richard's point, I think it was earlier, yeah, that's where we need to go. We need to go where if somebody gets hit by a bus, like if you look at the wonderful work that individuals are doing just on this panel alone, what happens when they're not there anymore? Who, you know, do these changes or discussions become so embedded in our organizational DNA that they continue? That's where we need to get to, and I think that that's what we all need to keep working toward.
Thanks, Tom. And I know Katie wants to say something else, but before that, Katie, we'll just see if Ian has any final comment, because I think we're going to be pushing up against the clock. Ian?
No, I will, as they say in British Parliament, Richard, I will yield to Katie.
Thank you very much, Ian. Katie?
Thank you. I just wanted to say, we really enjoy working together. We are, you know, great friends. We are colleagues, and I think whatever we are talking about and health and, you know, healthy culture and so on, we are very much all working. It's just so easy among all of us. There's this genuine care, genuine love and support and so on. So heart to heart, thank you so much. I absolutely love this panel, and we work throughout the year for now, I think 2-3 years together. So it's such a pleasure. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Katie. And I just wanted to mention before we are closed out because of time, to thank you, Katie, for convening the panel. It's my great pleasure to work with you all again. I think it's been a fascinating session, and I really felt there was a challenge when I looked at the number of presenters that we had on this panel, because my experience at the university has been that if you ask someone to speak for 5 minutes, they speak for 50. Yeah. But you were all fantastic and kept to your time. And I think it left a lot of good time for questions and discussion, but also a lot of questions for the future and the encouragement to keep plugging on with this approach. And so thank you to all the members of the panel, and Richard, thank you too for your technical support and help. So
I think Nick wanted one last comment if we still have a couple of minutes. So
absolutely. Okay, but and I also just want to thank all the people who have been watching in as well, who we haven't been able to interact with, and we hope you found it satisfying. And so Nick, we'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks both Richards. I just want to finish on all of the discussions I've heard through this week, and lots of other discussions I've heard through the year, all are heading towards a similar sort of theme, which is how do we bring about systemic change? And I'm thinking that would make an excellent central theme for next year's conference and something to work towards over the coming year and a half. And especially how do we engage the politics? I think within this panel is a lot of experience about that. But I think there are a lot of others who are struggling with how they know what works, they do what works. It doesn't bring about systemic change. It doesn't escalate to the political level. They don't get political support, and it's very frustrating. And I think those are essential challenges that would be worth making a central theme over the coming year and at the next conference. And I'd really appreciate anyone's thoughts on that.
Thanks very much, Nick.
Great idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Richard, I got to sign off. Want to thank you for herding the squirrels. Great job. Muchly appreciated. We're lucky to have you kind of helping us navigate. So muchly appreciate. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Dale. Well, thank you all very much. And we'll look forward to seeing you next year. And we'll keep in touch in the meantime. And Richard, I'll hand it back to you.
No, I have no other comments, but thanks. It was a great panel. It was a great discussion. And thanks, Richard, for moderating this and keeping, as you say, the squirrels in line. So anyway, take care, all.
Good. All the best, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Richard. Wonderful
Bye-bye,
moderator as always.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, Richard.